Welcome, my friends. We're gonna do another follow-up. I was cut short once by technical difficulties, cut short a second time, which I do not lament because my newborn baby son needed me. He needed to lay on my tummy, get patted on his butt until he burped up, fell asleep. We're back out here at it, and we've been discussing the Star Wars reboot. Now, I've taken responsibility for this. I have developed it thoroughly in my mind, on paper to an extent, in a very short period of time, but I feel like if it is exposed to the Star Wars fan base, there will be overwhelming support for this project. I think you can, even though we are strangers, I think we should meet. I'm looking at you, Disney. I'm looking at the development team for Star Wars under its new ownership. Thank you for the new episode. Thank you for your merchandise. You can't see it. I didn't do a video. I get more space out of my data to do a 30-minute podcast as opposed to a 5, 10, 15, or 30-minute video. But I am wearing a Disney hoodie, and it's crazy to say that at the same time, I'm wearing a Darth Vader hoodie. $20 at the Disney store. There's my free advertising for you. I get complimented on it, get talked to about it all the time. I said that in the last installment, but we are talking the Star Wars reboot, and I think it might be better and it might flow more smoothly if I just sort of discuss the characters in their context of the reboot as opposed to how we know and love them in the original series. Now, the reboot, episode 7 could be, and I suppose this next trilogy wouldn't necessarily be affected by it. Well, I suppose it would. However, the overwhelming necessity of rebooting Star Wars and its destiny to succeed drives me to really continue to give this project all the steam and all the attention it can get. And it's not for greedy purposes. I think I look out for every single person that calls themselves a Star Wars fan when I say putting steam behind the reboot, getting eyes on it, getting hands into it. I think we can come to an agreement very quickly that it can be written, it can be directed, and it can be presented to the audience in a way that will leave nobody wanting more. And to do that, to get you guys in the same frame of mind and have the same confidence that I do, I think I will go ahead and throw down the 3 primary characters that I think have a huge change from the originals to the reboot, and you might then start to agree with me that I know what I'm talking about. So number 1 would be Anakin Skywalker. Now, we did discuss Anakin Skywalker, but I think I got a little too deep into what the changes were, and I don't want to ruin the story, but I do want to give you guys enough information to know that this isn't a lame sauce attempt, and it's not a money grab. So Anakin Skywalker, you know his story through the prequels, and you know him as Darth Vader in the original series. What changes about him in the context of the reboot is that he comes into the story with a background and origin that will be more deeply discovered and more well-defined throughout the 2nd and 3rd episode, but for the 4th episode, we do focus on the Galactic Civil War. Now, okay, not the Galactic Civil War, I'm sorry, the separation into the Confederacy and the Republic and the war that breaks out concerning these two halves. Now, the presence of fallen Jedi, and dare I say, Sith come into the play later, but it's primarily fallen Jedi and dark Jedi that are combining their powers on the sides of the Separatists, who have decided for nearly a decade that they would go to war and secede from the Republic to do their own thing. And the familiar faces of the Jedi Council, obviously remain the personalities that we look to in these times. Yoda, Mace Windu, like Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, all these characters definitely remain. And before I do what I did last time and just sort of go off on the story, I'll just scoot it back to Anakin Skywalker. If you're not familiar with my earlier podcasts or anything I've done in the past, I do tend to wander and ramble, and I just hope to make it count when I do. But looking at Spreaker setup gives me an idea of the time blocks that I'm allowing for each of these topics. So I think the fact that we just passed 5 mics means that by 6, I'll start discussing Anakin Skywalker in depth. Okay, so we'll pass 30 seconds setting it up, and then hopefully we'll stay with that format. And I mean, take this as a chance to start to get to know me. If your ear is attached to a brain that is inside of a person that makes decisions or holds any weight within giving a green light or a red light to a project at Disney Studios. We'll go ahead and take it to about the 15-minute mark discussing Anakin. I also want to get in Obi-Wan, and I want to get in Luke Skywalker. And by discussing these 3 characters, we'll get a glimpse of the story and the complete change in attitude that each of the episodes would hold when put against the backdrop of the original episodes. So Anakin Skywalker, as I was saying, we don't see him as a child on Tatooine involved in a sort of light and fluffy version of slavery, I suppose, where, you know, his mother is a slave, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are dispatched to converse with him. How Anakin Skywalker comes into the tale is he walks onto the screen at 17 years old. Now, he was, in fact, a slave, the son of Shmi Skywalker, on Tatooine, but escaped when he was 9 years old. Now, his Force intuition, his extreme mental clarity, his power, and his determination, his mindset is different from what we know in that as a slave, his mother has always been very subservient, and the mystery of his origins is something that I really took out of the story altogether. Because the aspect of a virgin birth, I remember her saying there was no father. I mean, all of the mystery surrounding the prophecy itself, I don't think is as important. What I think is that the prophecy entails during a time of great change, a balance will come to the Force by meeting the power levels of light and dark. And he will be an extremely powerful Force user, and he will make his appearance at the time when the great balance shift, the polar shift of the Force in regards to sentient life will come about. Now, interesting note, I don't want to give away the story, but even if I do, it's not going to make it any less awesome to watch it happen, is because I have fallen Jedi, with Sidious being a dark Jedi as opposed to a true Sith master, and Anakin Skywalker becoming very powerful in the dark side aspects of the Force in becoming Darth Vader. Excuse me if I clear my throat a few times throughout the recording. Is because I wanted to use Sith, true Sith, Korriban natives that were touched, and Force sensitive, I should say, as a race, a species, and were affected by the Dark Jedi who went there in exile and sort of raised this massive civilization of the Sith to become the menace they were in the ancient annals of history in the verse. But I wanted to have those Sith reawaken. And I mean, the Dark Jedi being an absolute drop in the puddle, and with the Jedi being at such a high level of influence, population, and power throughout the Republic, there is enough of a Sith resurgence to balance the Force between light and dark side, because the Sith are exclusively dark side beings. And these, like, Vader and Sidious and Dooku, in essence, are not powerful enough to weigh off against an entire galaxy's population of Jedi. It's truly the Sith on the ancient reaches of the Outer Rim that have risen to such a great power through their revival, and that's the mystery that will remain unspoiled, if any of the mysteries do, to the very end. The character of Anakin Skywalker and into his transformation into Darth Vader is one that steps out, as I said, as a teenager. He fled as a slave from Tatooine 8 years ago. He does have a chaotic relationship in his own mind when it comes to his mother, because she was subservient and groveling, but she wanted to ensure the utmost safety and comfort. So I see her as like almost a sex slave, like treated like trash by the underboss, fucking like the underworld bosses that own them. And she does everything, she gives everything of herself to protect him in every way. Now he sees the violence and the mistreatment and the imbalance of slavery. And I don't mean to be preachy or try to connect it to our own history, timeline, IRL, but if slavery is one of those things that exists on the planets that are separatists, okay, that's pretty similar to our own story, but I can see Padme Amidala and many other sophisticated or civilized planets and species saying that's a blatant violation and like crime against like sentient life. To enslave a living, breathing, knowing, self-aware life form is so wrong. And that's one of the major factors that, I mean, when the separatists actually say, well, fuck you, excuse me, and break apart from the Republic, splinter the Republic, and start this epic civil war, Anakin fights alongside the separatists as a mercenary. Now, the fact that there's nothing about this kid that's known, he, 2 years into the first Civil War, is when the story proper starts off. Now, we can dedicate the time necessary to explain the truth and the construction of the galaxy and give us a much fuller picture of the wide variety of life across it, and makes the construct of the Republic as a government, a governing body over all life across the galaxy, what makes that so important, and contrasting the dark side to an actual negative effect on the lives of sentient beings. Now, Anakin Skywalker is noticed by the Jedi Council, because while the Jedi essentially falls in behind the Republic, provides their military support, advisory talents in the way that we're familiar with, both throughout all of the coverage of the Clone Wars into the prequels, and I mean seeing how enraptured the Republic and the Jedi Council and Jedi knighthood was involved. In this, we also see an opposite of dark Jedi, and I would say where there are tens or hundreds of thousands of Jedi throughout the galaxy, there are 10 or 15,000 dark Jedi that slowly melted away from the Council and from the Jedi Order to do their own thing as the other half of the coin, and they back the Separatists. But the Separatists are far more powerful militarily, because they've been preparing for this in secret for, as I said, a decade. Now, that's the balance. The dark side, fewer Jedi, more conventional power, and the negative on the light side. Now, that provides us, I think, all throughout the first 3 episodes, a great opportunity to showcase a hell of a lot of epic battle. And, you know, I've seen it through the prequels, I've seen it through episode 7, but getting more powerful with our depiction of the scale and awesomeness of interplanetary warfare. Let's keep on that train. But Anakin Skywalker, as I said, a merc that fights mainly for the Separatists, and he's got a huge rep by 2 years in of using, now the Force is known by many names, but all of these tongues are speaking of this young merc who wields crazy powers, as well as being epically skilled in starfighter. Okay, sorry, I keep getting distracted, but He can pilot the hell out of a starfighter. His acuity with droids, computers, mechanics, and sort of intuition on people, and being able to affect their minds, and essentially makes a hell of a lot of money and a crazy name for himself on the battlefield by defeating the Republic at every turn. And any mission he's sent on, any even like task from the underworld, like everybody's looking for this guy, but the Republic doesn't deal with mercenaries. However, the Jedi Council, on hearing more and more and more of these rumors, starts to realize this was already the end war that we were predicting, and this kid is the nail in the coffin. He is the chosen one. He is the one that will rise at the time of the fall. Now, this is a chance for us to see very familiar faces in Yoda, Obi-Wan, Mace Windu, geez, man, and like the dozens of others that were probably highlighted during the movies, but those are my main guys. And they begin to say, we have to find this kid, we have to bring him in. Like, if he is the chosen one, we need to do everything we can do to at least have his effect on the outcome of this prophecy to be in favor of the light side. Now, they realize, because of, they start investigating his past, they find out that his mother is still a slave on Tatooine. They sort of follow all these breadcrumbs he's left across the galaxy, discover his backstory of essentially stowing away on a smuggler ship, being, abused at first and treated like shit, and he just essentially stands up and says, like, who do you think I am? Like, I'll never be a slave. I've been a slave my whole life, and not for one more moment. He's like, the second I left that planet, I became no one. Like, I'm not Anakin Skywalker. He's like, I'm not a Skywalker, and I'm not a slave. And he decides to create his own destiny, and essentially, like, Force implodes this main aggressor's brain in front of a crew of bandits and space pirates, and they're like, okay, this fucking kid is some kind of prodigy, some kind of fucking, like, oh, he uses Jedi moves, man, like, we gotta take advantage of this kid. So they make him a captain at like 9 years old, and he's essentially brilliant. We can see him over the course of like 3 weeks drifting through space in his new ship, like scouring the entirety of all of the the libraries and data banks that are digitally available from the Republic, and learning the entire history of the world, devouring all this knowledge because he's got an IQ of like 3 hundo and a midichlorian count that dwarfs even the most powerful Jedi that we have legend told of. So you get my point. But he then spends his early teens up to about 17 or 18 going across the galaxy doing all this shit, making a name for himself, but not yet, like, evading the eye of the Jedi Council. And then when the trouble starts, they start looking for him and putting together these breadcrumbs of, he's been here all along, and it sucks we didn't find him sooner. We could have changed the destiny of the world and shit like that. Pardon all my cussing. If you prefer I didn't, I won't. But I think when it comes to Padme and him meeting, it's not this love story that the originals, I feel, in a way, wasted time on. Because the Jedi Council sends the more clandestine conclaves of Jedi, the Yellow Blades and stuff like that, to go and find out all this information, and they're on this trail of breadcrumbs. They cross his path a few times, and he evades or defeats them every time. And then he's like, okay, well, the Jedi are after me, and they're going to try and rope me in. And I really think the only angst part would be, like, he goes because he understands, like, with this knowledge database of the Force, I can achieve crazy, like, mastery over it. And finally, and I could become invincible. And when he gets there, they do tell him, they're like, with your power, your mind is unguarded, and we can see what you think, what you plan to do in your future. Now we want you, like, this is the effect that the side you pick, has on the outcome of life as we know it in the galaxy. And they sort of project into his mind what happens when the dark side wins, and they're like, how can you have lived as a slave and then fight for the same people that want to enslave half or all of the galaxy, something like that. Now, this does affect Anakin, and Anakin says, like, I won't join you, and I won't join your ranks. I won't be a student because I don't need to be one, and you won't give me these techniques because you know what I'll do with them. But if there's anyone here who can bring me to my knees, essentially, who can duel me, fight me, and make me submit, like, I'll allow them to be my teacher, my master. And several people volunteer, and several people get put down. And then Obi-Wan Kenobi steps up to the plate. And Obi-Wan schools this guy. And in fact, like, is so smooth in his Force, like, he understands that he would be pushed back by the raw power of Anakin's Force grasp. But by cleverly combining his use of the Force and lightsaber, he manages to make Anakin submit. So therefore, Anakin sort of steps up to be his sidekick. And Obi-Wan's job is explicitly given by the Council that he will help Anakin Skywalker discover himself and find the light side, essentially, and to help him develop his skills. But he's also there to put Anakin down the second that he becomes submitted to the dark side. Now, I feel like what would be interesting and what would cover both of their storylines would be if the Jedi Council, the peak of the light side, knew that they had to... So, okay, how about this? After they journey for a while and essentially are fighting in the Clone Wars for the Republic, trying to get Anakin to see that the Republic is truly what's best for the galaxy, Anakin still seems to be teetering always to want to be doing this for his own power and renown. So the Jedi Council devises a plan, and after he's had all this experience with the Republic but still won't fight for the Republic, they decide to stage the murder of his mother and all of these other slaves on Tatooine, and sending Anakin on a mission to Tatooine, and then essentially disabling their possibility of escape for like a 2-week period. And during that period, they take refuge in the town that Anakin escaped from, and Anakin goes to see his mother, and they reunite, and he essentially frees her. And I want to say he frees his mother from this compound belonging to a boss, an underworld boss on Tatooine. And he goes in and reveals that it's him to this, say, hut, because I love the huts. And this hut says, like, oh man, like, everybody said you went for the Republic and all this stuff, and, you know, nobody's seen you fighting for the Separatists all this time. He was like, why would you give up all that money? Essentially, you know, what changed? Because he's like, you've killed hundreds of people for me. And Anakin's like, I'm here for my mother, dude. And here's everything I've ever earned. And this is essentially amount to, like, trillions of credits. Right? Trillions, billions of credits. He's like, here, take it all, I want my mother back. And he's like, and this hut is being mind manipulated by Obi-Wan, and says, he like spits on Anakin, and he's like, you'll never, he's like, I wouldn't sell her for 10 times that. He's like, money can't buy knowing I've got a leash on the most powerful dog. He was like, I'll put 10 guns at her head. And he was like, you might start to use your Jedi magic, but she will die. He's like, I'll keep a bomb around her neck for the rest of her life and have you fight for me. He was like, you were just a tool. And all of these droids rush in, and they start a huge firefight. Now, I want to say it's key that the Jedi Council essentially orchestrated the droid showing up too, all in an attempt to kill Anakin Skywalker's mother, essentially in front of her face, have it broadcast and spotlights all over it on the marquee that it was the Separatists and it was the crime bosses and the slavers, everything that the Republic's against, so that in the smoldering wreckage of this fight, when essentially, Anakin has gone absolutely berserk and flattened half of the fucking city, that Obi-Wan puts his hand on Anakin's shoulder, and only like his supreme ability to shield his own mind keeps Anakin from finding out that feeling that he had anything to do with it. And voila. Anakin is now a member of the Republic, and vigorously then throughout episode 2 fights against the Separatists across the galaxy. Now, I think Darth Sidious, Senator Palpatine, I think was a way different character where he wasn't all sly and smug and playing both sides. I think he was blatantly from the other side, but he didn't reveal he was a dark Jedi. He definitely was against, head-to-head with Amidala and trying to throw his charisma in the mix and using his manipulation to sway others, because I feel like you couldn't be a fallen Jedi and be out in front where there's Jedi in the council, in the galactic council meetings. You know what I'm saying? In the Republic council meetings, if they recognize you, they're like, look at this mother, we got to keep an eye on him. Especially, if he was a Jedi and fell out and was known he was in the dark way. Because I don't think Sidious alone had the power to shield the truth about himself from people like Yoda, who were in direct contact with him as part of his role in the Senate, so they just thought he was a douchebag, essentially, right? Now, I think how that plays out is that plays a huge role in, I think, that climactic severance of Anakin Skywalker from the light side and becoming fully enveloped in the dark side. But I want to say that somewhere along the line, Sidious has his team of sort of elite dudes during a battle that both Obi-Wan and Anakin are involved with on a planet. A shit ton of Dark Jedi show up. It's a huge fight. But essentially, the Dark Jedi use their manipulation powers collectively to overwhelm Obi-Wan and make Obi-Wan think that Anakin has been killed. And Anakin is captured and taken to Darth Sidious somewhere in the Separatist territory. And essentially, I hate that I say essentially so much, but it is what it is. I'm sorry. Okay? Now, Sidious then shows the very powerful, now well-known, and it's obvious that Anakin is who he is as the Chosen One. Sidious uses the Force to make Anakin, not to convince Anakin, but manipulates the Force so that Anakin can hear the truth or make Sidious unable to lie. Because it was when the dark fallen Jedi realized in the aftermath of that event that turned Anakin to the light side what actually went down, they were like, this is the guy and this is how we're going to get him. And he forces Anakin to know that what he's saying is the truth and reveals what actually happened. And I'm thinking this is the end of episode 2. And Anakin becomes he goes Super Saiyan 3 essentially and wrecks half of a planet. And I think that or like a huge chunk of a planet. Now, this is about to end because we only have 30 minutes, but you get where I'm going. I'll keep it going if you want to keep hearing it, man. Get with me.